Welcome to another episode of the Victory Over Vices podcast, brought to you commercial-free by addictionhelp.com. I am your host, Dan Hauser, and today we're going to take a look at basketball player Braden Appelhans and his decision to step away from the game that he loves. On February 28th, a redshirt freshman basketball player on the University of New Mexico basketball team by the name of Braden Appelhans took to Twitter, or X, whichever you prefer to call it, to announce that he was taking a leave of absence and stepping away from the team. Now, I'm not a New Mexico basketball fan. I don't follow any of their players. Nothing in this story normally would have caught my eye. However, I was scrolling Twitter one day, and somebody that I followed happened to share this player's tweet. So at first, all I saw was just a photo of him and some words, and it didn't even catch my attention. I just kept scrolling. However, in my peripheral, I guess you could say, I caught the word, one word particular in the tweet, and that word was depression. And so when I saw that word, I immediately stopped, scrolled back up, and said, all right, let me read this and see what's going on here. And so I read the tweet, and I'm very, very glad that I did. And so I'm going to go ahead and read the tweet now. For those of you watching, it will be up on your screen while I'm reading. For the listening audience, you can listen along with me as I read Braden's tweet as follows. Those of you who follow New Mexico basketball may have noticed that I haven't been playing, or anyone who knows me may have noticed I have been so distant from everyone, and there is good reason for that. I have struggled with depression off and on since high school. I was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety in the 4th grade. I was put on medication to help with school and only took it during school, summers and weekends off. I was told my medication had a slight antidepressant in it. Since my depression wasn't constant and would come and go, my parents just helped me through it, thinking my medication would help. Last spring, after taking a medical red shirt, trying to recover from surgery, and learning how to balance school with a tough travel schedule, my depression showed up in a big, scary way. I went home after school got out, got into my doctor, and started on an antidepressant. I returned to the University of New Mexico for summer and fall and killed it in practice, was earning playing time and showing signs of having a great season. However, in late September, I started spiraling into a dark place again. My coaches noticed a dramatic change. I would call me several times a day to my mom in just a complete meltdown. I couldn't make it through a practice without breaking down in tears. I couldn't function, stopped doing homework, lost interest in basketball, and was going down a dark path to a point where I was questioning if I should even be here. My coaches called my mom and said she needed to come and be with me. She was on a plane the next day and spent 4 days in Albuquerque with me. I went to see the team doctor and learned my ADHD medication and depression medication were canceling each other out. For about 6 months, I wasn't getting any medication. I got on a new medication that worked with my ADHD meds and got in with a sports therapist. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again. Then the start of the semester came and anxiety attacks kicked in. They would hit me out of the blue. They were almost crippling and exhausting. So back to the doctor I went and decided it was time to stop the ADHD meds. Too much stimulation. Now I am about 2 months ADHD meds free. Grades are still good and I feel like myself again. I still take an antidepressant every day, but I am in a such better place. Through all this, I missed practices and games. My coaches, teammates, and everyone involved in Lobo basketball put me in a protective cocoon and took great care of me, and I couldn't be more thankful for them. My coaches decided to limit me to make sure I was mentally healthy. I've handled it the best way possible, and I understand their decision because I know what a dark, scary place I was in. You change from here. I am so grateful that I reached out for help. I knew I could call my parents, coaches, and teammates at any time. Most people, young kids and young adults especially, don't have that. Most don't dare to reach out and ask for help. I hope someone reading this will see that it can help. It can happen to anyone, even kids who are living out their dreams. Everyone needs help at some point. So there it is. That's the big story and mystery as to why I haven't been on the floor and why I have been so distant from everyone. I have accepted that I have an invisible injury that I am fixing, and I'm well on the mend. I will be back in a Lobo jersey next year, BA1. First off, this tweet not only took a lot of courage on the part of Braden, but hit home to me personally. I, growing up, as many of you who have listened to not just this show, but the Addiction Help podcast know, I too struggled my whole life with ADD. I was diagnosed with it at a young age. I was put on medication for it at a young age. I did not like the way that it made me feel. I had to go on antidepressants as well because of it, but I didn't think there were any other options out there. I just thought that was all I could do. One day I woke up and said, I'm not doing this anymore, and just stopped and figured out how to navigate my life without it. So I absolutely understand what Braden is going through. I have the utmost respect for him for doing what he did. It also shines a light on two things that I want to bring up here too before we wrap up the segment and get into this more with our guests for the week. First one is, when you think something is off, go get the help that you need. We say it every time on the show. It's okay not to be okay. But if you're not okay, it's also okay to get the help that you need. And Braden showed that, and he talked about that, and he knew something was wrong, something was not okay. And he kept figuring out ways to make it okay. The first time it didn't work out, so he went and tried a second option, and that one didn't work out, so he tried a third option until he figured out something that worked best for him. The second thing that I wanted to bring up that this shines light on is that being there for friends, family members, loved ones who are struggling can give them the strength that's needed for them to seek the support to get the help they need. He mentioned that he couldn't have done it without his coaches, his teammates, his family members who were 1,000% behind him. They were willing to do whatever it took to make sure that he got the help that he needed. And that also helped give him the strength to go ahead and not just try to find something, but when that first option didn't work, try, like I said, a second option and a third option until he figured out a way to make it so he could feel right. Because that's, at the end of the day, basketball is one thing, but to just feel right as a human being is the most important thing. And so when we come back, we're going to be joined by someone who is not only around this team and program on an almost daily basis, but was also at the press conference that Braden and the school had shortly after he sent that tweet out, and had a chance to talk to Braden himself. And that is Sam Hauser from ESPN 107, the team in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We'll be right back.
When did you start to feel any ease as you realized you were going to get the support from the players and coaches?
I would say back early January when I went through my second relapse, and they were all still there. They got me back with the doctor, and they're just supportive 100%.
All right, welcome back to the show. As I teased before the break, I am joined today by Sam Hauser from ESPN 107, the team in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Sam, thanks for joining me today.
Good to be with you.
So Sam also is the voice you all heard when we came back from the break here. He, like I mentioned and I teased, he was at the press conference that Braden and the school held. He got to chat with Braden a little bit during that press conference, as you guys heard from that question and answer. So, Sam, working in sports as long as you have, you've worked all throughout the country. You've covered everything from junior hockey all the way up to the professional ranks of Jacksonville Jaguars in the NFL and professional teams throughout the state of Minnesota. You're now in Albuquerque covering University of New Mexico out there. You've pretty much seen and heard it all at this point. What was it like being in that room that day for that press conference when Braden met with the media?
It was heavy for a few different reasons. One, because without knowing really the backstories or what anybody else is going through, it's one of those things where you realize that everybody's going through some degree of something. And as somebody who can really empathize with his journey over the last few years, I think COVID really got to a lot of us. And I've been in regular weekly therapy for about 4 years now. I've been on different antidepressants for about 3 years now because the world really flipped us all on our heads. So, you kind of realize that everybody's going through the same thing, but even for somebody like him, so just kind of give a little bit of a background. So Braden Appelhans is somebody who really comes off the bench at the end of games. He's not a regular starter. He's not in the rotation, but he's also one of those guys that everybody loves. A lot of college teams have those. When somebody comes in at the end of a game, you love to see when he does something. But even in that case, he's still in the spotlight. He's still a Lobo. And we don't have an NFL team or an NBA team or Major League Baseball. The Lobos are professional sports in New Mexico. So as long as you're on that team, you are a star in this state and you are under a spotlight. And so for him to do that, I don't think a lot of people really appreciate the fact that somebody that young who's a redshirt freshman could really just be that well spoken and that open about that kind of journey. It was breathtaking.
Now, you mentioned too, and I mentioned it earlier. He is a redshirt freshman, so he didn't play very much at all last year. Prior to you being in that press conference with him the day or two after he sent that tweet, how much time had you personally spent around him prior to that, and what kind of person, both on and off the court, is he? And was he? Is he?
Yeah. Excuse me. Not really a lot. He's really not somebody, because he doesn't play very much, and because especially last year, it was a medical red shirt. So he suffered a season-ending thumb injury in the first Mountain West regular season game. So because of that, he really wasn't made available. We really didn't see him around. He wasn't doing very much with the team. I mean, he was around. He was a part of the team. So the short answer is he wasn't really somebody that was made available to us, but the coaching staff never had a bad word to say about him. I mean, you can't be a part of this team even if you're not playing, if you're not going to be a team person. I mean, everybody just universally loves Braden.
So this may be a little complicated too, because he wasn't around a ton because of that injury and he was a redshirt freshman, but was there a point where you started to notice that he was around even less and less, whether it was at practices or at games or both?
Yeah. You kind of just, and I think this is something that there's a little bit of moral high ground-ish kind of area with this. As sports fans, we're very out of sight, out of mind. So like, if he's not around, it's kind of just like that, out of sight, out of mind. I mean, you do realize that, maybe you don't see him around as much. Maybe, you don't see him showing as much, I guess, just big boisterous energy at certain times. And it really just changes the perspective. Like, it kind of makes you go back now and realize that, he had his own thing, that he had his own journey that was so much more important than Lobos basketball, to kind of go back in hindsight and realize, yeah, maybe he wasn't a focal point, but now there's a very specific and important reason for that.
So you all who spent a lot of time in the local media around the team, were you guys kind of alerted or made aware of anything involving him before that tweet came out, or did you kind of learn about it in real time with the rest of us did when he sent that tweet out?
No, we all learned about it at the same time when he put that tweet out, and some later than others. I mean, I will give credit where credit is due. You actually sent that to me before it got a chance to float into my purview. I mean, he put it out on I think it was a Tuesday night, and the next day we just happened to have regularly scheduled media availability with Coach Richard Pitino, and they brought him in. But no, there was no inkling about that whatsoever.
You mentioned Coach Pitino. He mentioned a lot, both in his tweet and in that press conference, his teammates and specifically his coaches who were there to go to bat for him, were there to support him. As he described it, they kind of kept him in a little cocoon out of the spotlight. You also touched on it a little bit in a previous question too, but can you just kind of maybe expand a little bit on just kind of how tight-knit that whole group is, from Coach Pitino all the way down to somebody like Braden, who is kind of like that 12th guy off the end of the bench that may only come in garbage time, but is still just as valued as this, a starter would be.
Yeah, this whole team has really kind of been built from the ground up. So this is the third year now for Coach Richard Pitino, and he really built this whole team. So like, there aren't any holdovers from previous coaching staffs, previous regimes, or anything like that. Everybody that's on this team now was recruited by him. And for a lot of these guys, so, for Braden, this is his second year. For some of the other guys like Jamal Mashburn Jr., Jalen House, this is their third year. So this is a group that has really come up together. And especially, again, with the state of the program, where Lobo basketball is the biggest thing in New Mexico, and these guys honor that, and they cherish that, and they understand it. and they've all grown together through this whole thing. Like where the program was when this all started in 2021 to where they are now, like that's really been a big bonding thing. I mean, this is a program that has national notoriety, haven't been to the NCAA tournament for about 10 years, and it's something that these guys have really all put on their backs. So everything that they go through together. And Braden is absolutely a part of that. I mean, a lot of really what's led them to this point now of, fingers crossed, Election Sunday's coming up here pretty soon, is really just iron sharpening iron. I mean, so much of what these guys talk about as far as how they got to this point is how they push each other in practice. And so, I mean, that's part of really this whole story too with Braden is the things that we don't see, the things that really, even us that cover this team, the things that we're not necessarily privy to on a day-to-day basis are really what has made this team what it is.
So we saw something similar happen during the college football season involving an Ole Miss player and Lane Kiffin. Yeah. Unfortunately, and we did a whole episode on this, unfortunately, Lane Kiffin's reaction was about as polar opposite as you can get from Coach Pitino's reaction. You have spent a lot of time around Coach Pitino throughout your career. For those that don't know, your career and his career paths have gone in very similar directions. When you were in Minnesota, he was in Minnesota, the University of Minnesota Gophers basketball team. And now you're in New Mexico, and now he's the head coach in New Mexico. So you've interacted with him a lot. You spent a lot of time around him throughout your career. The way he's handled this whole thing with Braden, is that just the type of coach he is, or is this just kind of a one-off as far as he understood that this was something bigger than basketball, or is that just how he always is as a person?
I think it's just how he always is. I mean, full disclosure, so when he was at the University of Minnesota, I was in a little town about an hour and a half south down by the Iowa border called Austin. We just happened to be a University of Minnesota football and basketball affiliate. So, I did get the ancillary opportunity to kind of follow the team, and I did on a couple of different occasions spend some time around him at some media huddles. And so you kind of get an ancillary picture of him, but it's really helped, I guess, as far as putting the pieces together now that he's been here. And it does seem like he's the same person now that he was back then. And it's so interesting with him too, because he's been around this his whole life. I mean, for those that don't know, the name Pitino is synonymous with basketball. His father is Rick Pitino. So he's been around this his whole life. And, when you're in that coaching spotlight or that coaching mindset your whole life, it might be easy to kind of lose sight of, players come in and out all the time. And these, you're getting older while these kids are staying the same age. But he's always had this aura about him of just, look, man, we're all people in this world. Yeah, I'm a basketball coach and they're all basketball players. But at the end of the day, we're still, we're people. Like, I forget exactly what the context was, but he told a great story earlier on this season of just, and it was probably something to do with being in the spotlight. This team was nationally ranked and riding the high highs and the low lows and everything. And he told the story of when he was an assistant one year for his dad, and after a bad loss, his dad, Rick Pitino, was screaming at everybody, including the assistants. And then the game is over, and he goes to Richard, and he's like, hey, let's go out, let's go get a drink. And he goes, well, I don't want to have a drink with you. Well, what's the problem? Well, you were just screaming at us. Well, I don't remember that. So, I mean, there's that coaching mindset, and then there's the people, and he really brings those two worlds together really well.
So you at the press conference that day, obviously Braden was the main focal point of that press conference. While you were there, though, during a media availability, did you have a chance to talk with any of his teammates or any of his coaches, or did any of them also speak during the press conference? And what has their reaction been like overall since all this happened?
So none of them were made available, and that's pretty common. I mean, usually on the weekly pressers, coach is made available and then one player. That time it just happened to be Braden because of the timing of everything. Beyond that, it really hasn't come up much, which isn't surprising. I mean, this team is so locked in right now on the sports part of it, of being on the bubble, of trying to get in the NCAA tournament. I'm sure there might be a time and place for this later on. When the season's over and we're kind of reflecting on things, there might be a time to kind of bring this up. as far as talking to some of his other teammates about it. But just from what we were told secondhand from Coach Pitino, I mean, this is just something that the whole team is really rallied around and hoping that it kind of brings them closer together. I mean, he talked about how 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds are a lot more resilient than we are, than he is for people his age. I mean, he was just so supportive of Braden and spoke so highly of the team and how they kind of rallied around him. Because, again, like I said at the beginning, when that guy, every team in college basketball has that guy. That guy comes off the bench at the end of a game. He makes a big shot. The roof comes off. The crowd erupts. Everybody loves to see it because he's getting rewarded for all the effort. And Braden really encapsulates that as much as I've seen any team in college basketball that I've ever been around.
Yeah, I would say in a lot of, or not a lot of, in some of those circumstances, that player is sometimes the head coach's son, and that adds another layer to it. In this case, obviously, it's Braden, and hopefully only because he's still a redshirt freshman, you would have to hope and pull for him now, especially even more so that come his junior and senior year, he'll be one of those starters or one of those main rotation guys, and not a guy.
Yeah, and he's got a bright future on this team if he chooses to stay. I mean, he's right now the Lobos' 3 starting guards, they're incredibly talented, but they're all 6'2" and under. So he's got a little bit of, he's got a few more inches on him. He's a great 3-and-D guy. So he's got a future ahead of him if he wants to stick around. So hopefully we are seeing him for a few more years.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I think that stood out to me the most in that press conference was he mentioned that part of the reason why he decided to send that tweet was because he knows that others are going through what he's dealing with. You talked about some of your struggles over the last few years. Earlier in the show, I talked about how this really resonated with me because I also was diagnosed with ADD at a very young age. I too went through the struggles of trying to figure out balancing medications and something to make me feel not awful, until the point where I finally, just like him, threw my hands up in the air and said, I'm done with all this. I'm going to figure out how to just do this, kind of on my own. He also mentioned that he was surprised in a good way the type of response that it got. And so I think that was the thing that resonated the most with me. And that's part of the reason why we do the show every episode is we want to bring to people's attention, like, hey, just because you're not a famous athlete or in the spotlight doesn't mean that you can't also struggle, but you also can't go talk about it and get the help that you need. And this is just another example of somebody, especially in your local community, who has that platform, who has that spotlight on him, as you mentioned, but then he took it and used it for good in a way of saying, hey, look, I'm not okay. And I know there's other people that out there that aren't okay too. And it's okay. And this is what you can kind of do. It's okay to go be vulnerable and ask for help and go get that help.
And that's what's so impressive about this. Again, for somebody that young, the second part of that you mentioned, not just understanding that he needs help, but having the presence of mind to say, or at least, or having enough of a worldview, I guess, to say there's probably other people that are dealing with this too. I mean, when we were in college, our purview of the world didn't go very far past our eyeballs. So for somebody who is a redshirt freshman, so somebody who's a sophomore in college, to be able to say, I bet there's other people that are probably, if I'm dealing with this, there's probably other people dealing with it too, was just unbelievable. I mean, I can't imagine when I was a sophomore in college being able to kind of take that step to say, man, I bet there's if I'm dealing with this, I bet there are other people are too. It was so unbelievable, and how well he handled it too. I mean, certainly he's in a good enough place now where he can relive some of those things and not break down from it. But yeah, just beyond impressive. And it reminds you, because we all need this every day as much as we can get it to, it reminds you that there's a lot of good in the world. Like you said, I mean, I would be stunned if anybody would be that overt in somebody coming out about their mental health journey and having some kind of negative or mean or unnecessary response. But it does remind you how much good there still is in the world.
Yeah, and it also is another great reminder too that whether you're 9 or 90, you don't necessarily know what somebody else is going through that you may walk by or may be talking to, and that it doesn't cost anything to just be a decent human being and offer support if needed. And so I think that was another great thing that he talked about too, because he talked about how everyone immediately, from his parents to his coaches to his teammates, immediately, and I used it earlier, he mentioned, he kind of described it as almost like a cocoon. They basically like huddled him and kept him from spiraling and from things getting worse. And then he was able to meet with various team doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists there on campus, which is another great thing that these universities are offering their student athletes, because obviously just to be a student athlete at a D1 level, and especially at that level, Mountain West basketball is no joke. You talked about it. There's just a mental toll that comes with that on a daily basis just from playing. And then you add other things that are going on that can compile that. And so it's good that he was able to get the support that he needed both on and off campus. Because I don't believe he's local, correct? He's not from the New Mexico area, or the
That is correct,
area.
yeah.
He's from out of state. So not only was he dealing with all this, but he was dealing with all this without having his family near him because he was out of state.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the underrated kind of side story elements of this. I mean, not to go off on a whole tangent because I know we could, but it's kind of interesting the way that this was inserted in there and the timing of it being what it was, that because we're in this new era of college sports where it was a lot easier to just get on the phone and book a flight for his mom to come out. Like, well, that was one of the things he talked about was, he would have these practices that he just couldn't get through, and they were able to fly his mom out here because, in the world, in the old era of college sports where you could give a kid a bagel but not the cream cheese, they could fly his mom out here on a plane and not have to give it a second thought about any other NCAA shenanigans. So that was one of the other side stories of this. And back to your point about about what these universities are doing, after he was done speaking, after Coach was done speaking, after all the microphones were turned off. So athletic director and vice president Eddie Nunez actually sat in on this. We didn't really know why he was there. It was a little strange because he's never at these, but he was there and we weren't really sure why until Braden showed up, and then it all made sense. And he's been here since, I want to say, 2017 or 18. I think he got here about a year or so before I did. And that's been one of his top priorities. I mean, certainly there are budget limitations and there's only so much you can do for having the amount of mental health counselors per student athlete necessarily, but that has been at the very, very top of his priority list since he got here. As somebody who's, he's been around this his whole life too. He's been in the SEC. He's been around the biggest of the biggest when it comes to college sports. And so coming to New Mexico, that's been such a big priority of his, and he's made that happen. And that was part of what helped Braden as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, it's great as we prioritize mental health more and more, as we view it as the same way as you would any other injury. In fact, here I'm looking up I want to go back to the quote here because Braden actually said something too with that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I think he called it the invisible injury or something.
He says,
along those lines.
he says, I've accepted that I have an invisible injury that I am fixing and am well on the mend. And it's important to remember that, your brain is a body part just like everything else. In fact, your brain is what controls the whole rest of your body. So just like if your leg is broken, you're going to get treatment for your broken leg. If your brain is quote unquote broken, in lack of a better term, it's important to treat that the same way you would treat any other ailment or any other injury, and take it as seriously as you would those other things. And I think it's in this era of player empowerment, it's helped bring mental health to the forefront and get everyone, whether it's coaches, administrators, fans, the players themselves, to view mental health the same way that they would view any other physical injury that they would be dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the opposite comparison. Not that there's necessarily a right way or a wrong way for the coaches to handle these situations, because there is no playbook for how to handle this. There's no set of written guidelines when it is the invisible injury, as Braden called it. But I'm glad you brought up the opposite, because if there was anything that would be close to the example of what not to do, it would be that scenario that you brought up about Lane Kiffin. I mean, it changes the way that, and I've never met the man, and I probably never will, but it changes the way that I look at him from here on out.
Yeah, this is a great example of how far we've come and how to address mental health concerns moving forward compared to what Coach Kiffin did, where that's almost like the old mentality and the reason why it was so everyone was afraid to address it for such a long time. But obviously, we talked about it a ton here. The coaches, his teammates, Coach Patino, the athletic director Eddie Nunez, they've all handled this in. There is no textbook, but if there was a textbook, they have handled it in the most textbook way possible. In fact, they really could write the textbook on how to do this and use this example from start to finish on how to, just properly handle situations like this, so everyone can get the help they need, do it in a way that is private enough or public enough, depending on how they want to go about it, and everyone comes out on the other side, hopefully better, healthier, and happier as a result of it, whether it's playing basketball anymore or not at this point.
Right, they really have, and I think it speaks to what's unique about Lobo basketball. Again, I mean, this is the biggest thing in the state. I mean, every kid that plays high school basketball in New Mexico dreams of being a Lobo and getting to play at the pit. I mean, it is the top of the top as far as kids playing basketball in New Mexico. But at the same time, like, what's really unique about this team is it's a community team. Like, you go to these games and the people that the fans that come to the games, like, they know the person sitting next to them. Oh, how's your kid? How's the family doing? How's this and that? So, I mean, it's this big team. It's this whole spectacle of sports, but Albuquerque is kind of like the perfect big small town, the big little town where everybody knows everybody. So there is that kind of, even if you're not from here, even if you're new to it, you kind of pick up on it early on. So there really is that community feel to it, which if somebody is going through something, there's going to be that community support.
Absolutely. And that's the key. We talk about it, when community and having people to lean on is so important, especially when you're going through something like he is. But I see here we're up against time. So Sam, thank you so much for coming on with me today. Thanks for sharing not just your personal story, but what it's been like being around that program and everything, with Braden and whatnot. So thanks so much for coming on today.
Hey, you've been a guest enough times talking golf. Happy to return the favor one of these days.
Absolutely. All right, Sam Hauser from ESPN 107 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thanks so much. All right, that'll do it for today's show. Thank you once again to Sam for joining me and kind of giving us an inside look, not just inside the New Mexico basketball program, but inside the community as a whole and how they've kind of embraced everything going on currently with Braden. Just a friendly reminder to everyone out there, if you like what you heard and saw today and you haven't already, please continue to subscribe, whether it's our YouTube channel, if you're listening to this the traditional way, wherever it is you get your podcast, please just do us a favor. And if you haven't already, click that subscribe or like button, depending on what it is on your platform of choice. Also, continue to share with your friends, family members, and loved ones. And also don't forget that Victory Over Vices is just one of the many shows on the Addiction Help Podcast Network. So be sure to check out all the other shows on the podcast network as well, too, including the flagship show, the Addiction Help Podcast, which I also host as well, and Lights of Recovery, which is hosted by the editorial director of addictionhelp.com, Jessica Miller. So those are the other two shows on the network. Be sure to check those out as well. And we thank you also for everyone's continued support out there, not just for this show, but for the entire podcast network as a whole and everything that we're trying to do out there to bring stories to the forefront and get those conversations out there that may not necessarily be getting the attention that they deserve. So, and on that note, I also would like to just remind everyone, we've talked about it ad nauseum today, but once again, just like with what happened with Braden, with everything we talked about, if you or a loved one is struggling, please, just like Braden, just like myself, just like Sam talked about, please go get the help that you need. Please seek the proper professionals to get treatment in whatever capacity that may be. We say it a lot. It's okay to not be okay, but it's also okay to get the help that you need. If you are unsure how to get started on the process of getting the help that you need, addictionhelp.com is a great place to get more information, whether it's about a certain specific ailment, or more information about how to start the process to get the treatment and the help that you need. So that all that can be found on addictionhelp.com. So that'll do it for me. That'll do it for us this week. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a good one, everybody.